17, 16, 15. Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Rich Greenberg from ISSA Los Angeles. Welcome to our October monthly meeting. We're going to have a great panel today. And before we get started, I want to give a big shout out to our vendor this month, Recorded Future. We've got Mike Carney waiting on board to just say a few things about his solutions. And Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate the opportunity to present to your group. I'm just going to jump right into my presentation. Go ahead and share out my screen and go into present. All right, are you seeing my screen, intelligence-led security? Okay, great. Well, Recorded Future is a security intelligence provider. We are the leader in our space, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about our solution. All right, so I'm going to start with some topics that I think everybody can relate to. What are the challenges in information security today? You know, it's clear that the attack surface continues to grow. You know, the alerts are just increasing. Folks working in security operations are dealing with alert fatigue. There's a lack of high confidence alerts and indicators, and folks are spending a lot of time on false positives. The result is, you know, we're seeing that 91% of organizations say manual processes are limiting their IR effectiveness, and that's leading to 44% of security alerts not being investigated, obviously creating some risk there. More challenges, you know, talking about vulnerabilities. I mean, there's tens of thousands of new vulnerabilities that have been identified every year. And if you're prioritizing those vulnerabilities based on criticality that's assessed by NVD, I mean, those number in the thousands, and it's expensive to patch, to take, you know, critical resources offline. So how do you deal with that patch prioritization, especially if you don't have visibility on what's actually being exploited, because those risk scores that are being calculated by NVD involve a lot of different attributes, but not necessarily are they being exploited in the wild today. And in fact, only 5.5% of vulnerabilities out of the, you know, several 100,000 have actually been exploited. You know, more challenges today, just, you know, doing that threat research, aggregating all that intelligence, trying to access closed sources such as the dark web or closed access forums, and just, you know, not having that visibility into the threats that are facing your organization. Third-party risk. I mean, questionnaires are point in time, manual processes, you know, siloed systems. It just leads to, you know, the inability to really effectively monitor your third-party risk. So, you know, what if you had the ability to have access to security intelligence across the entire, you know, kind of landscape of security, from the attacker's perspective to the internet infrastructure and communication channels to the, you know, the target space, and be able to correlate all that information to get really that end-to-end visibility. And that's what Recorded Future is doing, is that we're bringing in, you know, big data, 40 million plus documents a day across multiple languages. We're collecting all this intelligence. We are correlating it and analyzing it. I'll show you. I'm going to speed up here a little bit. So we're bringing all this intelligence from these three domains, attacker, gray space, and target. We're bringing it into our intelligence graph, which is powered by natural language processing, machine learning, to structure, analyze, deliver it, and then deliver it in an actionable format that, you know, ultimately you can ingest into that security tooling that your companies have already invested in to make them more effective, as well as delivering it to your human analysts in the SOC, you know, in the cyber threat intelligence teams. But really the idea here is to make this intelligence actionable. So with my 5 minutes, I'm out of time. But if you have more interest in Recorded Future, go to recordedfuture.com, and you can even request a demo as well as get additional information. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Mike. And again, a big shout out. Without our support of our vendor community, and a lot of things that we like to do and present to you folks would be very difficult. So take a look at Recorded Futures info and see if they can't be of help to you in your organization. Now I would like to share just a few slides about ISSA. And first of all, a big welcome to everyone. This is our October meeting. We're still going virtual for now, but I have some good news that'll be coming up shortly. But for those of you who are not aware, ISSA Los Angeles is where the entire ISSA International started over 30 years ago. And we're still going strong. This is in large part due to this great group of volunteers that we have, and none of us get paid despite our best efforts. And we work hard to bring you these events and in-person and conferences and training. So I want to thank my fellow board members for the hard work that they do. Again, not for recognition, but because we feel strongly about what we do. You can join our community if you're not already. The first stop would be going to ISSA-LA.org and signing up. In the upper right, you can receive messages. We don't spam. It's all valuable info, where our meetings are, where the trainings are, and a couple of interesting bits of info. And you can stay connected with your fellow peers. I want to give a shout out to our educational sponsors. They've provided either free or discounted services and training. Please do take a look. Thank you to these 4 groups. Stay in touch with us on social media. We're on all the major platforms, and we try to get involved in some interesting conversations. Please do feel free to respond to any of our posts to get some dialogue going if you'd like. We have some upcoming meetings. We have a Wireshark workshop coming up at the end of this month. So I would strongly advise you take a look at that. Wireshark's a great tool, and that will be on a Friday. Here's the big news: in person. How about that? How does that grab you? You want to actually sit and look face to face with someone, and well, maybe they'll have a mask on, but they'll be drinking beer and eating with you. We're going to be doing that in Islands Restaurant in Westchester, right in the Howard Hughes Center there. And that's going to be at 5:30 on November 11th. So please do join us. Several of you will be off that day for Veterans Day. So it should be a good way to celebrate. If you're still working, we'll wait for you. Come on and join us. November 17th, we'll have another virtual meeting. Presentation would be a maritime cybersecurity panel with all of the recent backlogs at the ports and some question about security of our critical infrastructure. I think this would be very interesting. I advise you to join us on that. If you want to ask questions for today's panel, any of the panelists, you can post them on app.sli.do Slido, and just enter code ISSA-LA, and you can ask questions either anonymously or you can provide your name. That's entirely up to you. We would just appreciate a little feedback. We'll probably take questions at the end, but so do take notes. But if you put them in the Slido, whenever you think of it, we'll get to it. All right, so much thanks. We got a wonderful ransomware panel today. I know all of these folks quite well for many years, and they're top level InfoSec professionals. And in the case of Michael Son, he's a lot more than that. He's with the FBI. But we got Bruce Phillips, Serafino, Mark. This is going to be a terrific panel. Just a little bit more about each of our folks. Michael Son, supervisory special agent for the FBI. He's currently leading a squad at FBI Los Angeles Field Division that is responsible for investigating computer and high technology crimes. By the way, there's a lot more information about all of us on the ISSA website and on Eventbrite. For the sake of time, I'm just giving you a quick title of and headline for each of the participants, but take a look and you can learn more about each of us. Bruce Phillips is Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for West, a Williston financial group company, which creates industry-leading technology to streamline and fully integrate the real estate process. Serafino Sini is a senior enterprise security consultant with more than 20 years experience spanning many IT domains. And Mark Smith is a director of information technology at a leading national law firm. He handles all aspects of technology, including cybersecurity, disaster recovery, and business continuity. A big welcome to our panelists, and we would like to get started. We've a few questions that we've kind of kicked around, and we thought that might be interesting to you. We are all too painfully aware that ransomware is gaining notoriety, and it is expanding. There seem to be ransomware for hire. There's a lot of question about the cyber currency aspect of it, but lots of people seem to feel that there's not a lot that they can do, that they're doing the best that they can. But we're going to talk about some of the things you can do, but I wanted to open up by giving everyone a good idea about who one of your best partners can be in once you get hit with ransomware, and that'd be our friends at the FBI. And if you don't already have a relationship with them in some capacity, you should think strongly about how you're going to do that. And so let me introduce Mike Son and ask him to share with us what you believe the FBI's role in ransomware is and what it can be. Mike, you're on mute.
So, Richard, thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Son. I'm one of the cyber supervisors in LA. Actually, as of this Monday, I'm actually switching. I'm an embedded liaison to the NCFTA. That's a nonprofit org here in LA downtown. So if you want to come visit, more than welcome. I'm still the FBI rep embedded there. So a couple of things from the ransomware side that the FBI does, right? Ransomware, it obviously is one of the biggest threats that's facing from our investigative priorities. It seems the two things that's happening that the FBI is looking at. One is BEC and one is ransomware. So I know we're talking ransomware. So let me kind of focus on that. The FBI is investigating various ransomware variants. And then we create centers of excellence across the United States. So if you get hit with certain groups, we might be help you provide the contacts of that field office working that variant to provide you some tips and or some other TTPs that the bad guys are doing. Now the FBI, besides the investigative arm, taking them down or doing some arrests, I think the most important part, the FBI's official role, right? Official policy on ransom is FBI does not support paying ransom in response to ransomware attack, right? That is the official FBI stance. Obviously, we completely understand that it's not a realistic issue, right? But to address the growing ransomware problem, the FBI and all the US government agency this past year, instead of keeping it just at the FBI, we actually moved it to the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. That it's an interagency group based out in DC. It has over 15 different government agencies specifically focused on the prevention and response to ransomware attacks around the world and then also with prevention. So that's the kind of the official FBI's role within the ransomware fight.
Great. And you brought up paying a ransom, and I would like to ask our friend from the middle of the country right now, Bruce, what do you think about paying a ransom, and what would be your advice and what you've seen from your peers?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Richard. Really happy to be here. I know I'm in the middle of the country, so I'm no longer in LA, but I really enjoy getting back and talking with all of you guys. Paying of ransomware, it's really getting interesting now. If you look for the last few years, ransomware has changed dramatically, right? When we first thought about ransomware, it was like a drive-by shooting. It was just somebody spraying bullets, and if they hit somebody, they hit somebody. You paid $300 and you were done. I look at that as that was a proof of concept that this was a viable business solution for the criminals. They've taken that and they've taken that and gone into a more targeted attack. They are on your network for a long time. They do a lot of research to figure out what you can afford to pay. They find out if you have cyber insurance or not. And if you have it, they figure out what your limits are, and that's going to be what your ransom is. But the real question about whether or not you pay depends on what you are expecting to get out of payment. Ransomware is no longer just ransomware, it's extortion. Now they are going to say, I've stolen all of your data, you no longer have access to it, and if you pay me millions of dollars now, I will let you have access and I won't tell anybody. Yep, be quiet. But if you don't tell me, if you don't say something, I'm going to put you on a wall of shame. I'm going to let everybody know that you were hacked. So if your intent is to stay off the wall of shame, then you consider paying ransom. If you think that paying the ransom is going to get you out of trouble now and back into operations, I have a newsflash for you. It's not going to get you out quickly. I've talked to several different board members over the last 3 or 4 months, and every one of them had the same misconception. If I pay the ransom, I'm back in business right now. In reality, if you pay the ransom, they're going to give you a decryption key, and that decryption key may or may not work. Remember, you're talking with criminals. Quality assurance is not their number one priority. And in actuality, and Mike and I talked about this, in most cases, you have data corruption and you're not going to get all of your data back. Now, the interesting thing is no one wants to say that they didn't get their data back because no one wants to say they paid the ransom. So that's the dirty little secret. So what do you want? What's the goal of paying the ransom is really the first thing you need to understand. The other thing I would say is have a discussion with your board, with your senior leadership, and answer the question of why would you pay the ransom first? You don't want to make this decision when it happens. You want to have had this in your playbook of why you would do this and how you would do this. And the other bad news is you might get arrested if you pay the ransom, because now the government is starting to do things like, sanctions against the different ransom, this cryptocurrency exchanges. So if you use the cryptocurrency exchange, you just just performed a federal crime. Is Mike going to come to your office and arrest you? Well, we'll see. I don't know if they've ever tried this yet. And I haven't heard of any reports of someone paying and getting in trouble because of that, but it's always there. So paying the ransom isn't just a yes or no, right? You have to think about it now. You have to understand what your expectations are for paying the ransom and the limitations that you're going to run into. And the one other thing I got to say, in no place do they ever say, we will not resell your data. What they say is, we won't tell people that we took it from you. So ransomware not only is no longer ransomware, it's not simply extortion. It is a breach. Your data has been lost if you have personally identifiable information of citizens of the state of California, you now have to worry about CCPA and CCPR and CCRA or whatever they call it this way.
Good points, Bruce. I think a lot of people are not really thinking very far ahead, and they have no clue in what's involved in paying the ransom. And then what?
Well, that's one of the challenges, is how do you get that much Bitcoin, and how do you get it to someone legally, and then what are you going to get out of it? And so what I tell people is, yes, plan for that. Understand what you're going to do now, but also understand ransomware is not magic. Ransomware is nothing more than another piece of malicious software that criminals are going to try to get onto your network. So if you have good hygiene, if you have good logging, reporting, you're detecting, your best bet is to stop it. You got to, plan for the best, attack, stop it. Don't let them get any further than where they get at the beginning, right? But you got to understand that sometimes the best laid plans, of mice and men fall apart, right? So what are you going to do if you have to pay that ransom? And understand all this before you get into this, because the worst thing you can do is try to make these decisions in the heat of battle, right? If you've never reached out to your local FBI office, and then you have to do it in the middle of a ransomware, that's the worst time, right? Get to know Mike and his team. Ask them questions. They're there. They're not bad guys. If you ask them a question, most of the time they're going to give you a pretty good answer. And if they don't know it, and I have offices throughout the US. If I have an issue anywhere, if I reach out to Mike or anyone else in LA, they can point me to the guy in the right place to give me the right answer at the right time. So that's my plug for the FBI. Get to know them, have them as part of your tool, so that you can respond to things better, because it's a great resource. And the check's in the mail, Mike.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Mark, you and I were discussing this the other day. We actually did meet in person and had drinks, so we didn't have to wait to the November 11th meeting. But let's turn back the clock a little bit. What can companies do to prevent that ransomware attack so they don't have to deal with the cyber currency?
Yeah, well, there's a couple aspects to it. There's prevention and then there's defense. So I'll kind of launch into the operational side of prevention, right? CISA's got some guidance that way. There's some other guidance, like other people have mentioned, and it's being developed. There's multi-factor authentication, right, wherever possible. That seems to be a line in the sand, right? That with password management, make sure passwords aren't reused anywhere, that they're not guessable. Strong passwords, minimum of 12 characters. For user accounts, 16 plus or greater. For system accounts, use a password manager if possible, right? Secure email gateways, right? Curtail that phishing, right? Most of these intrusions happen through phishing, right? There's a number of leading API-based programs now with some great AI and ML that are actually working really well, right? So that's a main vector to watch and to actively manage. And then there's internet-facing vulnerabilities and misconfigurations, right? Another big thing to keep an eye on. Patch, making sure obviously Flash is gone. Java should be limited. Adding browser extensions and so forth, browser updates. Make sure those things are done. Make sure your SQL server, you don't have any cross-site scripting attack type things. Those things are patched. RDP, VPN, right? People do VPN to be more secure, but they don't patch, right? So nobody likes to patch necessarily, right? But it's a big thing operationally, right? And then security and awareness training and phishing testing, right? Not to be discounted, right? Just keeping that in front of your people and making sure you're doing that testing, the obligatory testing and so forth, and keeping that awareness high. and the old phishing button with a whatever program you choose, right? Make sure there's a good dialogue between the users and the support people, right? So that you're able to ferret out what's happening before there's an incident. Like Bruce said as well, maintaining your logs, aggregating your logs, so you have a minimum 90 days, right? And having the logs aggregated with some sort of analysis, whether it's a SOC internally or externally, make sure you're seeing any indicators of compromise and what's going on, right? And that you have these logs in verbose mode for long enough to be able to go back and see exactly what's happening as needed, right? DNS filtering, visibility to command and control call outs and so forth. Again, kind of following within best practices. So within best practices, you've got all the typical genres, least privilege access, and then you've got enabling account lockout, including APIs, making sure there's no local admin rights, hardening the equipment, the server builds, the workstation builds. Also within best practices, auditing your MSPs. A lot of people just bring in these MSPs and think things are great, we're handled. Well, no, you got to audit your MSP, MSSP, both, right? And make sure they're using MFA, right? Make sure they're following best practices. They should be audited regularly. As a matter of fact, that's a vector of attack that's been pretty frequent. So something to keep an eye on in terms of best practices and restricting PowerShell, things like that. So back to defenses for a second. Being able to stand up should this happen, right? You have a disaster recovery business continuity plan, right? With that, you have your recovery time objectives, your RTOs, your RPOs, recovery point objectives, right? And that helps you kind of inlay your backup plans as well and your restore plans, right? God forbid you get wiped out. You want to make sure that you can restore in the time that your users need, right? So operationally, these things should be tested in advance. They're actually part of a larger plan your company should have. In advance of that is knowing where your data is, having a data map, right? A lot of people are shocked what they have, right? And a lot of times you don't need to keep that. So you can mitigate your exposure by knowing what you have, right? And then when you want to respond in your incident response, with your tabletop exercises and so forth, it's incumbent to know where the data is, right? To be able to segregate the situation, to break it down, isolate it, and know what your exposure is, right? So doing that homework up front can save quite a bit. Golden images for critical systems, right? Like Bruce and other people have said, these things, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Having these things in your bailiwick is important. So that's some of the defensive.
Well, one of the things, Mark, is with golden images, treat those like your backups. In other words, they have to be immutable and offline until you need them. Because if they're online and they're not immutable, one of two things are going to happen. One, they're going to be encrypted like everything else, and you're not going to be able to use them. But two, you can go in and put a backdoor in your image, so when you recover, you're just recovering and putting the backdoor in place. And so that's why you need to, that's a really cool term. Immutable offline storage is what you really need to think about for your backups and your golden images. The other thing to think about is logs are important to understand what happened. If you look, and this is a number that just drives me crazy because I've been tracking this number for the last almost 20 years. And the number is the time from breach to detection to remediation is somewhere between 265 and 280 days. And it's been that number for the last 20 years. So now think about the fact that you may not know you've been breached for 200 days. You're not going to know where to start because you never have going to seen what happened. And so we got to start thinking about longer term backups, and that's cost, right? Unfortunately, if you say I want to have 365 days worth of a backup, storage vendors are going to love you. But if you're not fast enough to detect, analyze, and respond, then you're going to need that for 280 days. And so that's sort of the challenges we look at, is hygiene is important. It's the most important thing we can do. You can throw out all the tools. If you're not doing the basic hygiene, you're going to get, owned, and you're going to get owned quickly. And you're not going to know about it until someone like Mike comes to the door and says, we track this back to you, or a screen pops up on your machine that says, we now own all your data, give us $2 million, or we're going to tell everybody.
By the way, the FBI is doing a lot more victim notifications to victims. So if we do call, please don't hang up. Most people think it's a break. So we are calling, we are reaching out. We have investigations that could detect the precursor to ransomwares. Like Bruce and Mark, you were saying, just a timeline. We've seen them in their network for almost 2 months before they go from initial intrusion to decide to start exfilling and start ransoming the files. We will call sometimes, and again, please don't hang up on us.
One thing to think about is how much data do you have, and how long will it take you? How long would it take you to encrypt all of that data? They're going to be in your network at least that long.
You should also be thinking how long it would take to decrypt that data to see if you and your company is prepared for that downtime. And if you haven't done that, test, you should figure out a way to find out how long that would be, because you don't want that board meeting to all of a sudden go haywire when they find out, yeah, we paid all this money and we have the decryptor, but it looks like it's going to take 4 days.
It's worse than that, actually. I know a couple of I don't know if very many people have heard about the CloudStar ransomware event that took out all of their customers. They were down for month and a half. They're still recovering. I know multiple companies that have gone out of business because they couldn't weather the storm. And then I also know 2 companies that when they recovered the data using the decryption key, the data was unusable. So my advice, whether you pay the ransom or not, make sure you have good disconnected immutable backups that you can recover from and test them, and rely on your backups, because there's 2 things. You're going to have a better sense that your data has not been altered. And more than likely, if you test it and you get the kinks out of it, you're actually going to be up and running faster.
We've kind of danced around that very important topic that seems to go like a thread with us as CISOs and security leaders throughout our careers, and it's become the most important aspect of what we do, and that is risk. We evaluate risk, and the risk of ransomware, it brings with it its own challenges. But one of the things that we always need to do is tie risk into the business. And as security leaders, we need to understand the business. I know that, Serafino, your job is specifically about risk, but you're very familiar with how you could tie ransomware to the business and what that involves, and how you speak to the upper management about that.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. And again, thank you for letting me say a few words on this topic. People think of risk as kind of the boring side of security, I'll be frank. And I think that's actually not so true. Risk there's a 2 sides to risk. There's a risk communicating risk, and there's managing risk. People get lost in the managing risk, but they don't necessarily do a good job of communicating risk. And what do I mean by that? And I'll try to go back to the basics. In general, I like to work sometimes outside the IT world, because you need to kind of have your mindset involved in other activities that occupy your mind in a different way. And the reason why I want to go down this track for a few seconds or a few minutes in the conversation is to try to get people to understand that every person in this group itself, and everybody every day manages risk, from the moment they wake up in the morning at 8 a.m. to the moment they go to bed at 9 p.m. if you're lucky. And basically, we don't realize that we're managing risk, but we are doing that. And two situations occur. Risk does not change based on the complexity. Risk is something that's associated with a business. So if I'm in the business, I've worked for companies in the Fortune 50, in the Fortune 500, in the Fortune 200, and they're always multinational. And one of the challenges that I've noticed as the biggest challenge is that when you manage risk, you also manage funding to assure that you have the right resources being invested in to protect you from ransomware. And a lot of times we get too carried away with the talking to the vendors. And I'm going to be frank, I know that we still have, I think the vendor actually dropped off. Some vendors really do provide good value, but the thing that the vendors are here to do, they want to sell a product and want to sell a solution. They'll tell you that our widget is the best widget you can buy for ransomware protection because we will detect the executable. As soon as an executable tries to do something wrong, we will prevent that from happening. What you don't realize is that the people that are playing the ransomware game are just as clever as we are. And what they'll do is if they see that someone is building a tool to detect, they'll work around it. And what do they try to do most common? And that is they will try to use tools that are being used by us to manage our own day-to-day operations. They will use PowerShell. Why would they have to use an executable if they know that that has a signature that 5 million products detect? And if you buy the latest one, guess what? It will detect it. So when we talk about people being in your network for 250 days before they actually complete the event of the ransom, what we're saying here is that they're at that point they're no different than an administrator that's managing your network that you're not aware of. And they're using all our tools, they're using PowerShell, they're getting everything in order so that they can plan the attack and obviously complete the attack. Now, how does this relate to managing ransomware in a business? Well, we talked about cyber insurance and they look at cyber insurance. Let me tell you, cyber insurance companies, like every other insurance company, for example, they're in the business to collect money and not pay out. Now, I'll be frank. What that means is that you can sign up a cyber insurance policy. What is exactly doing it for managing your risk? Not much, because it's after the fact. And so they could potentially pay out, but cyber insurance companies are very smart, just like every other insurance company. They will make sure that they exclude any type of event that they have already seen before. So if you're not doing something and you're not doing proper hygiene, or you answer the question mark, they give you this huge questionnaire, they come in, answer all these questions. And if you accidentally answer the question yes, where the question should have been no, they will automatically hold you liable for basically being incompetent, and therefore the insurance will not cover because you basically declared that you had one feature of control that you currently do not actually have, and therefore they're not going to be liable or responsible for that. So let me take this a step further. When you're managing risk, for example, of cyber insurance, it's the same thing as managing risk for when you have a car and you want to buy insurance. And the reason why I use this parallel is because it's very important. When you buy insurance for a car, you try to partner with a company that you know that when things hit hard and you actually lose a car, get stolen, or whatever happens, you want to make sure that they put you right, they set you straight. And so in general, if I had an old car that I'm restoring, I'm not going to buy AAA insurance or State Farm or any of these, run-of-the-mill insurance companies, because I'm worried about how much money did I spend in the restoration project and how much money, what will set me right is I have to restore the car. If I spend $50,000, most insurance will say the car is 40 years old. It's worth $1,000 at most, because that's how they pay. But I have to find the partner that meets my requirements. So let's take that example and go to the company. When I do risk analysis for the companies I work with, every vendor is a partner. Every vendor has to be vetted. And let me tell you, vendors that you do business with, especially if it's a critical relationship, they will tell you what you want to hear. So we go back to what Bruce and both Mark said, which is vet your vendor. But vetting does not mean you have to ask them a bunch of questions and they give you a bunch of answers. Vetting means you're using third-party tools and third-party companies to basically make sure that if they have policies, how well are they managing those policies? Are they implementing those policies? Are they actually doing the work that they say they do? Are they encrypting the data the way they're encrypting it? Are they controlling identity and managing identity access the way they're supposed to be managing it, which is when someone leaves the company, immediately the identity gets cut off. So going back to ransomware management, when you're managing risk, a vendor that gets hit by ransomware is the same as if you got hit by ransomware, and your contract is not going to protect you from that. We've had that situation. I'm not going to discuss the details, but if a vendor gets hit and they provide a critical service, whether it's a hosted service online or whether they provide a particular warranty, particular service, or let's say they provide a customer-facing function. Well, if they get hit, your name brand is on it. The people, the customer that's looking at that site doesn't know the difference between the vendor and you. It's it's an extension of what you provide. So it is critical that when you manage these vendors, you understand that they are an extension of what you are providing. So all this cloud first technology that all companies are following has to become cloud smart. And I think most people have heard that term now being used. And cloud smart means if you're going to partner with a vendor who's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, treat them as if you would analyzing directly your business, and make sure that you understand what their capabilities are in preventing ransomware or managing risk and managing cybersecurity practice, the program itself. So to take it a step further, the risk management is critical. Now, the other side of risk management is the boardroom. If you do not communicate risk well to the boardroom, you might as well call the day done, because at this point you will not get funding to support the risk management. And what I mean by saying the boardroom does not care how many times you've got how many antiviruses you got hit with, or how many things you blocked. They're not a quantity entity. They don't care about quantity of the work you do operationally. That is not of none of their interest. Their interest is really more about, we have a business that we have to run. How are we managing risk in the various areas of the business? So to give you an example, again, I'll use examples outside of the technical side. If you're in a lake and the operation team is fishing and they say, hey, today we caught 5 catfish, tomorrow we caught 6 trouts, the next day we caught 6 more catfish, and you report that to the boardroom, they'll walk you out of there pretty quickly. And what I mean by that is, when you talk to your direct manager group that you manage operationally, you get 1 hour of time to discuss how to deal with ransomware and risk. When you talk to the next level up, you get maybe 20 minutes. When you talk to the boardroom, you get 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, you have to communicate where the risk is for the company and where we should be investing our efforts. So risk management is not about technology, and it's not about managing risk in terms of the occurrence of something happening. It's really about understanding what are the business, and if you're in the business of sales, manufacturing, and customer facing, treat that as your critical business. Understand what that criticality is, and make sure you stay in front of it to say, what can we do for our customer? Oh, do we have PII? How are we protecting it? Are we doing everything that's required to make sure that regulatory wise we're meeting the regulation? But the regulation is helpful only to a certain point. Your job is to make sure that we're doing above and beyond the regulation. Regulation is a check mark, which is important, and it helps you get there. But the intent of regulation is to help us do the right thing.
Yeah, great points. The one thing is, my job isn't to be security. My job is to enable the business to be successful within the risk appetite of the board of directors. And so that's the discussion. I don't talk about ransomware as the technology and how it goes on. I talk about there's a thing that's happening, and it could affect us. It's affected others in our space. Here was the result of that, and here would be the potential results for us. But we have done this, that, the other thing. So at the end of the day, it's a wash. Or if we are concerned, we could do more. Here's the cost. Here's the benefit. They don't care about the technology. They care about the dollars and cents, because that's their job, right? To run the business and maintain profitability. My job is to help them do that. So they don't care. They don't know how many antivirus hits we have a week. They just need to know if we've been attacked and if it was successful or not. And if the answer is no and no, then my 5 minutes are done.
That's correct. Thank you for sharing that. And that's absolutely true. So I believe that as to manage ransomware, it's no different than managing any other item. And I would like to leave the conversation with one other image. Cars today and cars in the past do the same function. So cars have not changed in the last 50 years. They take you from point A to point B. How did the cars in the 70s do it? How cars in the 2021 do it? Well, we have dashboards. The same thing that a car has a console, and you see, your fuel level, you've got your oil pressure, you've got your water temperature. Those are dashboards that says when you drive, any of those indicators go off, you know you have to stop and think about how is it going to affect my ability to get to the destination I'm trying to get to. So is true for managing ransomware or any type of security type situation, which is today you have a Tesla. So you have to use a screen and push a button on a screen to get the glove compartment to open. Oh my God. So now I have to go 3 levels deeper to get some function that in the old days used to be very immediate. Fine. So there's more complexity, but nonetheless, it's still a car that takes you from point A to point B. And is it doing that job? And have you done everything possible to make sure you are able to achieve that goal, which is, have I charged the batteries to the car? Do I have a full tank? Does the car function? Can it take me there? What's my dashboard? Well, I'm seeing my speed. I'm seeing where I'm going. And so is true for technology. You have the SIMs and that collect all the data. That's great. But if you don't know what to display to the various people, the driver wants to see one type of information. The passenger wants to see a different type of information. The person that's actually probably monitoring your drive, let's say you're a trucking company, and there's the corporate office wants to know when you're going to get to destination to pick up the product so that they know and how many miles you travel. They want to see a completely different set of information. So it's important to use this example to say, risk management and reporting and managing technology is the same way. It's give the information to the right people and make sure you have the right monitoring for the right purpose for that particular use. And
give them the indicators that they should be worried about.
Exactly.
It's called key performance indicators.
Exactly.
Right? Your tachometer has a red line. There's a reason for the red line. If you exceed it, bad things happen. That's a key performance indicator. Don't exceed that. Right. Same thing with your gas gauge. It's got little, it gets a little red area down at the bottom. You're getting low on gas, go get more gas. What we need to report to the board is, here's my key performance indicator and I'm operating within it. Have a nice day. Or we are trending down, therefore we probably need to do something. Right? But that's really what it is from that perspective. And I'm gonna second what you said. We are an insurance company. We do title insurance. We are in the business of collecting premiums. We are not in the business of paying claims. That's the exact same thing from every cyber insurance carrier. They are not in the business of paying claims. And they are writing in specific riders for specific things that you need to do. Michael sort of talked about a little bit BEC. There's now a rider in almost every cyber carrier that says, if you wire money and you did that on an email and you did not talk to a human being, we will not pay. If you don't know that and you go and file a claim and, oh, we just got an email, they're not going to pay. Why? Because they're losing too much money. $1.9 billion last year in wire fraud. I don't even want to think of what the ransomware numbers are going to be this year compared to last year. It's just going to be nuts.
And to take that even further, now they're using a category called force majeure, which is basically considered like when you get a hurricane or you get a bombing or some sort of civil unrest as part of the exemption from any type of insurance policy. And all the claims all the agreements I've seen, even with vendors. So let's going back to the vendor agreements. They all want to put cyber inside the force majeure, which means if a vendor says, hey, I get DDoS, I get attacked with some particular malware or anything else. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, if you're putting this in the force majeure as a policy, as an agreement between you and I, that means that anything that happens, that your services become unavailable, it doesn't matter what you say earlier. Yep. You're basically getting yourself out of, getting a ticket out of jail. And I'm finding this more and more common in the last 6 or 7 months. And depending which companies you deal with, it seems to be a difficult item to negotiate. Because if I'm doing business with a vendor, I don't consider you not having a good security program as being a safeguard of saying, well, I'm gonna say if I get attacked and it's something out of my control, well, you can control it. There are things you can do. You can, in the old days, they used to put a club on cars. So let's go back to the car image. You don't want a car to be stolen, you put a club on it. So today they use as an attack tactic called a amplification reflection on the fob keys to steal cars. What do they do? You're sitting in your house, they amplify the signal, and they're able to steal a BMW in 30 seconds flat. Well, guess what? If I had a club sitting on that steering wheel, good luck. Well, what is the club in IT terms? The club in IT terms is a basic. Don't go away from the basics. Things that worked 30 years ago can still work today if you do the right thing. Now it's inconvenient because now you have to get into the car, you have to take the club off, put it behind the back seat. But guess what? Any tactic they use today, the club would have prevented you from actually getting the car stolen. Most likely, they will pick another BMW. They will not pick yours. Same thing with the wheels. You put a nut that locks them down, make sure it's not one that you bought from O'Reilly where they're all the same, or 5 of them are all the same model, and you can get the same thing. You will always find wheel, because people are, crimes of opportunity. Now, on the ransomware, there's another side to another darker side, which is big game hunting. And I think we talked about that. Big game hunting means they're now making it, hey, we know we're going to spend time with this particular company because we know we can get some real value out of a ransomware attack. So big game hunting is a little different because it's what you call planned. It's very choreographed. And as you said, by the time you get hit by the ransomware, they've already closed and shut down all the doors for you to get out of trouble. They've already attacked your backups, whatever they can get to. They've already attacked your communication plans. They've already affected you in a way. They want you to be as what do you call it, stressed as possible when you get that note. And the way to make you stressed is to make sure that whatever plans you've already set up, they will not function the way you planned them. That's their job. They know that we try to plan things very well, but guess what? I call it catastrophic. At least someone that I heard in a recent presentation, they call it catastrophic ransomware. Catastrophic ransomware is where they ransom your company, but they attacked all vectors so that you can't even do basic communication with your own board, and you find yourself completely blind. Now what? Now how do you handle that, right? So how do you manage that risk? So you have to think about that. The game gets more active and more persuasive as the company is big. And don't assume that you're a small company and therefore they're not going to attack you. So that's the general stuff. There's the kind of spam-based ransomware, which is they just go after everything, and they still do that because obviously they want to hit everybody. But in general, the big game hunting is what I look for. I'm in the Fortune 500. It's all big game hunting at this point. It's not, the target, when they attacked the vendor that was doing obviously the air conditioning, did the vendor get vetted? Did we know that letting them in a secure area, that they had their own cybersecurity program that was good? That could have been heavily avoided. Honda, that would happen just this year. If they had done patching, possibly they might have been able to avoid that problem. So when you look at the actual details of the ransomware, you'll find out that a lapse of judgment or things that you could have done ahead of time would have potentially helped the situation.
Well, I think you're bringing a really good point in that the game is changing, but the game is always changing. And I'm going to go back way in my past. I'm a former Cold Warrior. Cold War was fun simply because it was, I'm going to beat you by having better technology and I'm going to outspend you. And that's how we won the Cold War. There was no shooting. There was some fights and other things that happened, but it was, just I do something, you're going to do something, I got to do something else, right? So now, exactly like you just said, it's changed. Now they are going to shut down your communications. They are going to try to disrupt everything. Now I'm actually currently in the process of doing this. I'm redoing my incident response and disaster recovery plans to take that into account. So they're going to come up with something else. And then I'm going to have to do something else. And then they're going to do something else. It's never ending. That's why my job is so much fun. I never know what I get to do next, but I know it's always going to be interesting.
And another thing to amplify what you said before, Bruce, what's changed, another thing that's changed is hygiene rules have changed from 20 years ago, right? I mean, where users are going,
yes,
what they have access to. And you hit it earlier, and some people go hygiene, okay, great, brushing my teeth, next. Now you really have to give that some thought, because without the right hygiene, well, you're in trouble.
Yeah, because the hygiene, I'm going to argue with Serafino on this one. What we did 30 years ago will not work today.
I agree.
What we did 20 years ago will not work today. What we did 10 years ago
in and of itself
may work today.
Right.
But the hygiene has changed. The way we work has changed. Where we work, the accesses we have to give people. We are no longer in this wonderful ivory tower where we keep all of our really cool stuff. Our cool stuff is probably right now driving down the 405.
Well, sitting.
somebody's
Sit-
laptop.
Sitting.
Well, sitting on the
Yeah.
405. I'm losing that, right? I get on the freeway here. I actually drive.
Well, you don't have freeways where you live.
There is. It's about 20 miles away.
I thought they called
That's-
it's called a highway.
Yeah, it's Interstate 80 is right over there. So I get on it once in a while. But no, that's the difference is the hygiene has changed because the way we work has changed. Speed of business is much, much faster than what it was, 20, 30 years ago. And as IT professionals, we have to allow the business to do what the business does at the speed that they want to do it. We got to find guardrails. And one of the biggest guardrails is understanding security hygiene as what it means today and making sure you're on top of that. That's the number one thing that you can do. Everything else is on top of that layer. But if that layer isn't there, all this other stuff is going to fail.
No, and I think I agree with you. I mean, I think my example is probably taken out of context in the sense that when I say go back to the basics and use the tools from the basics, it means that basically make sure that people that have access to data are the ones that should have access. When you're dealing with vendors, there's obviously new reports that you had SOC 1, Type 1, SOC 2, Type 2, SOC 3. And the reason why this changes is because there are different things you want to look at when you're dealing with a vendor or when you're dealing with a third party that you have to monitor. And I would strongly advise that, yes, of course, as things get more complex, you want to make sure that the vendor is up to speed with those changes. Now, going back to law enforcement, and this is where I want to get Michael back into the mix, is that from a risk perspective, law enforcement is also a critical relationship. Unfortunately, I'll say this up front, and Michael might correct me, but it's they come into the picture after the fact. Sometimes Michael mentioned that sometimes they'll come to you before the fact. And honestly, the only time I've seen anything happen before the fact is when a friend of mine works for Facebook and says, look, we're seeing some weird traffic that seems to be coming from your network. Can you check into this? This is not normal traffic. It's like they're using one of your machines is being used for something unusual and very nefarious. And so I will go in and say, yeah, you're absolutely right. But this was because I got a friend at Facebook. Now, that relationship always exists. Now, from the law enforcement perspective, I think that, I hate to say this, but when I think of NSA, they knew about certain vulnerabilities way before they became public knowledge. And they chose not to disclose them. Why? Because it was to their benefit to use those vulnerabilities so that they could actually manage their own activities. Now, I don't want to say that that's true for any type of government agency, because I don't think that's true for the FBI at all. But I'm saying sometimes you have to understand, is a vulnerability, what is an inconvenience for us? It's a big convenience for someone in the business of trying to get into other people's systems. Let's be frank. And you cannot change that. That's just the way the world works. So I believe the FBI can provide value in understanding the type of attack you've had. They probably know a lot about the ransomware group that's attacking you, and they can give you a lot of good pointers like, hey, we've had 10 customers, and let me tell you, you pay that ransom, it's not going to work because we've already seen it 5 times. That's where they can come in and bring some real strong value.
So you're 100% correct, right? It depends on how the investigation and what our optics is into the subjects and the criminal groups that are out there. Again, in the cases that we're working out of LA, we're looking at the beacon, so we know kind of already who they are. We've made notification to government agency, hospitals, and everything else. But you're right. For the most part, we come in after, right? And this is where I think like you were saying, we would understand this actor. You pay them 10 times, they've never recovered the money, and that's the kind of insight. The other side that we have, like a lot of incident response that we've been part of in the last year. So a couple of things, Bruce, you kind of like, yeah, we could do the FBI could do a lot of stuff. Unfortunately, the FBI doesn't do incident response. And I don't think this was discussed on today. It's up to the customer or the victim to do their own incident response. And depending on how big it is, right, the cost is kind of different who you use. What we do at that point, we've actually had situations where we work with the incident response team to collect evidence, right? Like, hey, we think that evidence, that this TTP, this IOC, we might be able to push it out and prevent future attacks. We also have situations once they start going to the ransomware negotiation, we actually step out, right? I've been in phone calls with the victim, the incident responder, and us, and they said, hey, we're done. I think you said catastrophic ransomware, we have to pay, right? And I think when that occurred, they actually asked us to leave, and we did, right? And that's why we don't know how much they paid or what they negotiated with. The other component that I think it's kind of important that we're seeing is some of the ransom group. It's a critical infrastructure that I can mention. The ransomware actors went in, they started, like I think Bruce, you mentioned, they knew exactly how much insurance they're going to pay. However, what they did was like, oh my God, this is really important. They went from a 400,000 initial ransomware to $4 million insurance just because they knew who they were, right? So we're kind of seeing that kind of optics as well. Unfortunately, that we could provide some maybe intel, right? It might not be anything actionable, but intel on your business decision to either pay the ransom or not pay the ransom. I think that's kind of valuable to the victim, right? The other component that we're starting to see it, and whether I agree or not, that's irrelevant, is, there are a lot of legal lawmakers who are saying, like, you have to disclose a ransom payment, right? Like, I don't know if you guys saw that in June of this year, they're like, hey, we're going to make you report it. And I'm like, oh my God, we're just kicking the victim while they're already down, right? So again, that's on a different side. From the FBI side, again, like Serafino said, like, we do come in afterwards. We're part of the incident response team. We don't do the actual incident response, but we hope to provide you some nuggets of intel that you can make a better business decision.
Yeah, there's one other little piece of information that might come in handy to some companies. But there's a site, I think most of us have heard of it, but some haven't, nomoreransom.org. It was a collaborative effort by European law enforcement and certain companies in the anti-malware space to find out and publish the decryption keys to a lot of the popular ransomware attacks. Sometimes those keys would work and save the company a lot of headache. Other times it wouldn't. But it's just one more place you can go, nomoreransom.org, if you are a victim of a ransomware attack. Just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and to that point, the Colonial Pipeline that happened, I think I heard, obviously, that the ransomware folks that actually caused that were not planning to cause such a disruptive situation.
Well,
They
that's
actually
what
they got a little concerned that they weren't. But what exactly? That's exactly where I was going, Bruce. It's like they're saying that now they themselves sometimes don't know what they're dealing with, and they might go into a situation where they can cause some serious side effects. Hospitals, maybe Colonial Pipeline, whatever it may be. And I'm thinking, well, how's the risk of being managed there? And really, what it comes down to is understanding that risk, and could it be done? Could things have gone differently? Well, it's big game hunting. Unfortunately, when you're protecting, it's a bit like watching for what do you call it? For meteorites or something that could be an extinction level event in the sky, and we're sitting down with a telescope saying, well, how much of the sky can we look at any point in time? And obviously, we can try to prevent something, or at least know that's going to happen to try to plan for it. But we're on the defensive side. And unfortunately, when it comes to ransomware, they have a lot more time and to spend in trying to prepare for these kind of events. So when I think of ransomware, it's getting a lot more sophisticated, no question about it. But what you need to do as a company is focus on go back to your core business areas, air gap. I mean, when I do production planning for factories where when you're actually making product, you can air gap that. You can make sure that now I will tell you this: the business does not like it. We as security consultants have to always walk a fine line between what the business wants and needs and what we think is best for the business. And unfortunately, that's an area that I will say is still very challenging, because we sometimes we're there for the business, but we have to sometimes introduce some friction where they prefer not having any. But the value of that friction can be very significant. And air gapping production is a good way to talk about it. I don't know. And then obviously you can do that in other areas too, depending on how critical they are.
One of the things that you brought up there is they said, well, the ransomware gang said, we didn't mean to do that with Colonial Pipeline. They also said at the beginning of the pandemic, we're not going to attack hospitals anymore. And then they came back a couple of weeks later and said, well, no, we were misquoted. We're just going to reduce the ransom payments for hospitals. You have to understand, that's the PR arm of ransomware gangs. This is not some rogue actor doing this. These are businesses. They have business plans. They have, salary. They have HR. They have, PR. These are businesses. We're not going against an individual. We are going against other companies that happen to be funded by stealing from us.
What are their benefit packages like? Are they looking
Probably better than ours.
Yeah.
Except the bad thing is you don't want to piss off the government you're in, because they throw you under the bus. They have Michael come pick you up, and your replacement is in the wings to pick up your job. It's a brutal business. But we got to understand who we're fighting against. When they say these are these APT gangs, these are companies that focus on a specific niche within cyber warfare. And that's what you're up against.
And, quite frankly, they're supported and endorsed by nation states.
That's the problem.
In a lot of places, yes.
Like Somalia helps the pirates and they don't do anything about it. We're finding ourselves in the same situation, because United States, if someone tries to play this game in the United States and they get caught, the whole kit and caboodle gets locked up and the keys get thrown away. And obviously some countries believe in the privateer concept. As long as you attack someone else and not me, you can go at it until your heart's content. And that's problem. Yeah.
There are countries where it's not illegal to do this unless you do it in that country.
Exactly, which is interesting, because to me, it tells me that the ransomware, where's ransomware's future? We're trying to correct the ransomware. When you look at the idea of how you deal with the risk of ransomware, it's collaboration. If nation states collaborated more, this would not even be so much of a problem, because you could manage it. But unfortunately, as I said, there's always a dark side to everything, which is it's a convenience for some countries and not a convenience for others.
Well, there was a coalition of 30 countries that just got together a couple of weeks ago and now have said they're going to work together against ransomware. And we'll see how that goes. Coalitions against different nations sometimes work, sometimes don't. It depends on what's going on. But you have to really understand, if you looked at the list of people that are collaborating to fight ransomware, you'll find out that most of the countries where ransomware is being done from are not there. So, there's a lot of talk about, is ransomware going to get better or is it going to get worse? It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better, not anytime soon. The feds just, did a sanction against a single ransom or Bitcoin or cyber money exchange. Is that going to make a difference? Absolutely not. People are going to find a way to pay that ransom, or they're just going to use another exchange. What is the answer? The answer is there are criminals in the world. There probably always will be criminals in the world. When the well dries up, they will find something else. That's why we have jobs. We have to, and there's an axiom that's really old as a hill. If I'm out hunting and I come across a bear, I do not need to run faster than a bear. I need to run faster than the other people hunting with me. And that's what we need to do. We need to get better. We need to be in a competition amongst ourselves to see who's the fastest. And we should push each other to get faster, right? That's how we're going to succeed in protecting our businesses, is get better, make it harder. Right now, there's a couple of there's two really big things that are easy to do and are very profitable: ransomware and business email compromise. And those two things combined are more than half of all of the losses because of cybercrime.
And funny you say that, because on the business email compromise, the way that I've dealt with in the years that I've seen it, because it's actually gone up since COVID. It actually has gone up quite a bit. Where they register domains that are very close, they insert themselves in conversations, nobody notices, and then they ask for an ACH change. That's the typical attack vector. And what we found is that those problems can be solved. A lot of the function can be solved with manual procedural changes, saying, hey, don't trust the email like you would trust the phone or like you would trust the old system. So it's also an education aspect of the thing. So
Yeah, but
yeah,
we can get off on that tangent. I've been fighting
Yeah.
business email compromise in real estate transactions for the last 20 years.
and yeah.
And the people that are losing the money are the consumers, and the consumers have no clue. And they rely on people
Yeah.
who are their trusted advisors who have no clue and no skin in the game. And I'm the guy that ends up trying to protect people that don't know they're under attack. And they're making tons of money off of real estate transactions every year.
Yeah, no, and
Anyways.
I agree with you. I think that there's, but going back to, ransomware, as I said, BC, those are definitely the more profitable areas. And I believe, though, what I do not see that I'm hoping to see this year, and I think where's the future going with ransomware, is to see a little bit of more government collaboration. What I mean by that is that a lot of companies, so I work for Fortune 500 and Fortune 100. Well, guess what? There are resources in companies that large that can actually help mitigate some of the risk. What I don't like to see, I come from a Europe, where a lot of the services are provided by the state, which are services that cannot be individually managed. To give you an example, when you provide healthcare in America, it's a private activity. That means every company has to pay for healthcare for every individual that works for the company. And what I'm saying is ransomware and BC and technology, some companies can afford. They're big enough, they can share the cost. It's doable, it's manageable. But some companies are actually very small, and they don't have that kind of resourcing to be able to support the kind of tooling that we're asking them that they should be putting in place. So then the question comes in and says, when can the government start potentially providing additional resources? They provide a lot of free resources online, and I would recommend CISA. There's a lot of CISA.com, CISA.gov. There's a lot of government. DHS also has a lot of really good educational material. FBI probably has a lot of good educational material that people should leverage. But in general, I think that what we need to see is also a collaboration and cooperation with the government agencies to help smaller outfits or SMB type companies where they're just not big enough. Real estate is exactly a good example, Bruce. You brought up a really good example. I was doing personal transaction with a real estate office, and the way they were handling my data was absolutely abysmal.
Sure,
I mean, it was a joke. I mean, they were sending all my private information, credit reports, everything through a regular email, and it was not even an encrypted email. It was some, domain that they registered that they were trying to use. And I'm thinking, did they learn about this whole privacy? Is there any regulatory management of this? So it's a fault.
Not at the real estate agent side.
Yeah.
And they obviously didn't listen to any of Bruce's.
Well, they don't know anything about West Protect, which is the product that I run for West that is designed to help real estate agents, title and escrow companies, and all the other. The other problem is the people are cheap. If you tell them for $10 a month I can solve all your problem, they'll go, you know what, my brother-in-law's uncle can do it for nothing, so we'll let him do it. So you
Absolutely right.
People have to understand. One, you have to. It's a 12-step program. You have to understand you have a problem. If you don't understand you have a problem, if you don't understand that you are subject to ransomware attacks, if you think it's never going to happen to me, you're never going to do anything. And then it'll happen to you, and you'll be saying, why didn't someone tell me? Well, we're telling everyone, right? It's the number one thing on the news half the time. If you don't understand today that you are a potential victim for ransomware, there's nothing I can do to help you, right? Once you understand that, there are things that you can do, and a lot of the things that you can do are basic hygiene that cost absolutely no more money than you're spending today. They just require you to do it. But you're not going to do it as long as you think it's not going to happen to you. And so that's the challenge, right? Understanding that, we're not just talking about ransomware because it's a cool sound. It sounds cool. No, this is hurting people. This is hurting companies. It's funding terrorism. If you really want to go all the way back down to where the money trail goes to, this money is going someplace, right? And it's not going to good places in most places, in most cases, right? If you don't understand that you have the problem, you're not going to do anything. And there's nothing that I can say that is going to convince you to do something. And that's the challenge, right? To everyone on here. That's my challenge to you. Make sure your companies understand ransomware is a thing. It is a thing that you are a target for. And if you are not prepared, it's going to cost you a lot. Like I said, I know the owners of two different title and escrow companies who are no longer in business because of ransomware.
And you mentioned it earlier. I mean, the amount of effort to launch a ransomware attack. I mean, we're not talking about, somebody spending 20, 30 hours of examining your network. It's they buy a tool or they rent a tool.
Oh no, why I even do that? I go to a ransomware gang and I say, here's the target. Get what you can. You keep 30%, I'll take the rest of it, or whatever you negotiate.
Right.
I could be a cybercrime entrepreneur and I don't need to know anything. I just need to know how to get on the dark web.
Right.
Once I get that, once I get into the right forums, I don't need to know technology.
And and the risk to you and to the companies and to the people launching all these criminals, the risk is so low. How many of them have you heard about being arrested or thrown in jail or questioned or anything? They have immunity from the countries where they're practicing.
Yep. So that's the playing field that we're on.
Yeah, Mike just dropped some stats into chat there. You want to talk about that?
Sure. So, the FBI, I think, Seraph, you mentioned you're a Fortune 500 company, right? Like your company won't file an IC3 report, right? They will call us directly, right? Like, I think if any major Fortune 100 company get hit with any cybercrime, they're not filing IC3. The stats I'm showing you are from SMB, small to medium-sized businesses, where they don't have the capacity to kind of assess, right? They're just lost. They'll call the local police. What can we do? So the number, actually, it's funny. I was just at a SMB conference today, this afternoon. LA area, which my team covers, the 7 counties in LA, we're losing $31 million a month. And I'll tell you, those are all small to medium-sized business. They're not the large ones. Weirdly enough, LA, if you took LA out of the entire nation, we lead the entire nation as a state. That is how much money is being lost in this region of SMBs. I would say most of the SMBs. Funny enough, the other stats that I'll post on here is that LA also leads the entire nation in the number of ransomware victims as well. This is the one that's reported to the FBI this year, right? So I think that's number skewed because they're not reporting to the FBI, Serafino, like you said. They're like, why am I going to report to the FBI? What are they going to do for me, right? But we lead the nation in all the wrong stats, unfortunately.
Mike, a couple of years ago, I was talking to a couple of the guys at IC3, and they gave me an interesting number, and I don't know where they came from, but they estimate that only 40% of all cybercrime gets reported to IC3.
I'm pretty sure that's what it is. We've been doing a lot of outreach to the victims to make sure, for the purpose of the financial fraud kill chain, to do that for BEC, you have to do IC3 first before we execute. So they're seeing a rise of that, but outside of that, I think you're right. I would say it's lower than 40%.
So if you say that it is 40%, that $31 million per month that's 40% of the losses.
Right. And again, that's just in LA.
And that's just, yeah. I mean, and the number. So I think the last cybercrime number I remember was like $4.1 billion. And that's 40%. So you're looking at stupid numbers that I can't even comprehend. I mean, with the numbers we're at now, I mean, I remember when BEC started, the first report was $40 million. Last year it was $1.9 billion, and that's from 2014 to 2019.
Absolutely.
Why would I not get into that business with that type of growth?
Right. And I think, right, it's just become more lucrative all the time, right? So, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm sharing the stats that Michael posted, so you guys can see for yourself the crazy numbers that we're talking about here, right? California way ahead of the rest of the nation. But the fact that you're on this call today, many of you are out here in SoCal, others are joining from around the country. Always search out your local FBI. Always try to engage upper management, make them understand the risk. Make sure you have good security controls in place via a well-developed and tested information security plan. The biggest challenge probably that most of us will face is getting upper management to understand the risk to the point that they will fund all your key initiatives. That will not happen. So you have to figure out how to prioritize and make sure certain things, for example, a good patch system will probably take care of a lot of the attacks that are out there today, the non-targeted, right? Patching is the most important thing, and yet it still remains one of the more challenging ones that I still have of CIOs and heads of companies telling me, we just can't have a good enterprise patch. It's just so complicated. You don't know what we're dealing with. You know, we would have to have so many exclusions. Yeah.
Well, I think that the challenge is you can't patch everything. And this is coming from a CISO. And I realize you cannot patch everything. It's just not possible. If you're at any size of an organization, 500 million on up, you have too many systems. You have too many SLA requirements. You just can't patch everything all the time. So now what do? Right? When your patch window exceeds the amount of time you have for your SLA, what do? You have to change your thought process on patching. Segmentation of your networks, doing a risk-based patching approach, understanding who can attack you, who's attacking you, which ones of these vulnerabilities are actually being attacked. Where do you have actual proof of concepts or actual attacks available? You have to start being targeted on your patching and hope you can catch up. So and that's the discussion you need to have, right? If I go to a CIO today at a 500 million or bigger company and say, you need to patch every one of your servers every month on Tuesday, when Microsoft says to, they'll throw me out of their office. Mark would probably throw me right out of the office onto the street and say, never come back. But you have to have this discussion of what do you need to do, right? What are the things that are important? How do I protect myself, right? Understand that segmentation is important. Cyber hygiene is important. Understand that the goal of every attacker is to become an insider. Insider threat is important. It doesn't mean I don't trust my employees. It means I don't trust credentials. So how do I get better trust on the credentials and who's using them? We need to start thinking of more proactive about what we're doing and how we're going to protect the data, because that's what everyone is after.
Okay. Let's field a couple of questions we've got here from those of you who put it in Slido. Thank you very much for that. Is it wrong to believe that a minuscule fraction of businesses rehearse their disaster recovery playbooks? I'll add to that their incident response plans as well. Anyone want to grab that? I know what I believe. I believe.
I don't know if we actually have any good data. It's all guesswork. My guesswork, from depending on the size of the organization and how heavily regulated you are, that is a true statement.
And I think I would tend to agree on that in the sense that rehearsing playbooks can be very challenging and time consuming. So companies sometimes will rehearse portions of the playbook at different times. So overall, they do the rehearsing as intended, but sometimes it might not be as what you call end to end as one would expect, just because that's the challenge, right? You can't just grab a bunch of really busy people and say, let's take 3 days down, let's take 3 days off and sit in a room and do some training. Now, I've heard GM, sometimes they find a time to do that, and they, because of certain events that happened in the last few years. But I believe that it is true that rehearsing playbooks is a challenging aspect, but it does. Sometimes you'll hire outsiders to help you rehearse. You'll hire an actual company to help you rehearse. But unfortunately, I believe that it should be done a lot more than it is done today.
And you can't just have security and information systems involved.
Correct.
You need upper management. You got whoever has the keys for key management. You need public relations, because they're the ones that'll be making the statements. If you have to report this, legal.
God, I hope so.
Legal, clearly. What was that, Bruce?
So God, I hope you have, somebody talking other than the CEO.
And the other thing is, I would like to also say is that when it comes to playbooks and information, it's always important to know. I believe there is one area though that's very important, which is the BIA. We didn't talk about that, but BIA is a very cool tool that I've used at every company I worked for, which is the business impact analysis, where you actually interview the various key stakeholders or the various key business areas of the company, and you establish, because every year it might change, and you have them give you the information. Because the one thing we didn't talk about is that sometimes you feel like security is by itself, like we're the ones that somehow have to come up with all the answers. Well, it doesn't work that way. The answers come with you talking to the management and giving them tools to give you the information you need so you can make better decisions. BIA, which is business impact analysis, is a key tool that I've seen used many times, where it says, let's at least know what we have that we have to protect and why we have to protect it.
Mark, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and to that question, right? I think in the SMB space, it's a lot harder to get those resources invested, even in DR plan, the BIA, right? The larger companies take more stock in that and more ownership, and that's probably what Mike is seeing, like at these smaller companies are getting hit, right? So there's that dichotomy. And back to what Bruce said earlier, yeah, and Richard, Richard was right. You'd be shocked the number of companies that just aren't patching. And Bruce comes with a very nuanced perspective. It's a lot more black and white, unfortunately, with a lot of CIOs, a lot of just not patching the way that they should, just doing the basic blocking and tackling because they're getting hit operationally. They don't want to interfere with operations and kind of let it roll. And they're taking some shortcuts and just not doing it. So you're right there, Bruce. There's the practitioners that are more advanced or whatever that can be looking at some of those other nuanced things. But I think Richard brings up a good point. You'd be amazed at the number of companies that just straight up aren't patching the way that they should for no good reason.
There's large companies that aren't patching, and they've made the news.
Yeah, it's shocking. So
Yeah. Hey, we have a question for Michael. If you can share whatever you're at liberty to share, some of the common mistakes made by companies that have been victimized by ransomware.
It's funny. I think you gentlemen just answered that question. Is they're trying to do it by themselves. They're going to like, hey, don't tell anyone. We could do this. Don't worry about it. And then next thing you know, it's now at day 4 and they didn't realize like everything's gone, right? They could have at least learned some TTPs or brought in outside help. The other side, like you were saying, is, they're not engaging their leadership, their management. They're trying to do it, and trying to do this with their hair on fire, right? And that's never the good times. And unfortunately, that's more what I see. I think it's the large organizations who gets ransomware, and they're defeating that. They already have that playbook in play, and they practice it over and over again, right? The critical infrastructure do it in LA, Southern California. It's as big as they are, they have to, right? And we participate in those kind of in their tabletop exercises. But some of the mistakes, like I said, is again, they're trying to do it themselves, not trying to tell anyone, trying to hide it, right? Until it's just too late, and not engaging all their legal team, understanding from the IT side what they could share with us, right? Almost every crime that we go to, not just ransomware or anything else, our biggest hurdle is not the IT team. It's not the incident response team. It's the legal team. They'll say, don't give it to them. Like, we need that data to help you out, right? For any type of assistance, you want to give us IOCs, how are you being attacked? We might be able to run that on the fly and provide additional guidance. And it's not engaging your legal team, because legal, for some reason, it's a no first, right? And it's a struggle, especially when your hair is on fire. So, I responded to smaller incidents. I was at the Sony when it occurred several years ago. Like, we were one of the first guys out there. So again, we've seen the whole spectrum. But again, I think getting all your folks engaged up front is your best. Is almost
Yeah, Michael, I think you hit something that's really important. You need to talk to your legal team before you have this problem. You need to have these discussions about, can you share with law enforcement? What can you share with law enforcement? You want to have these discussions. It's just like anything else. You don't want to have this discussion in the heat of the battle. You should already have these discussions. You should already know what you can and cannot say, what you can and cannot, share, so that you can move at the pace of the attack, right? If you haven't talked to general counsel, or you're the head of your legal team, about what are you going to do with any cyber attack, with any breach, somebody needs to have that conversation now, because it's going to make whatever you're going to do harder, and it's basically going to cost you more money at the end of the day, because of how you handle that breach. Because especially if you're a publicly traded company, if you're going to be in a lawsuit because of a breach at the end of the day, right? When everyone else is done with you, your shareholders are going to file a class action lawsuit against you because of the ransomware attack, which lost data and lost money. And now you're going to be protecting that. You got to start thinking long-term and how you're going to deal with this stuff. And if you're looking like the Keystone cops during the event, that's not going to look very good at the lawsuit.
Yeah, I think on that note, we're going to have to put an end to the festivities. It's been a really good, interesting panel. I think we left you with a lot of things to think about. I want to thank my esteemed colleagues, Serafino, Bruce, Michael, and Mark. And I look forward to being able to have this conversation in person next time. But I encourage you all to stay in touch with us on our social media. If you were here in person, I would be trying to yell over the applause, but take my applause, panelists. Nice job today. I really appreciate it. Everyone stay safe out there. We'll see you at future meetings, and please try to patch. Thank you very much.